everybody, let's head to the Middle East. Here at the dawn of the 21st century, what do you think of when you hear the term Middle East? What springs to mind when you think about this part of the world or the term itself? Well, there may be a cascading million different thoughts that spring to your mind, and if you're a tourist or a kid or someone who's just pretty much completely clueless about the world, maybe when you hear the term Middle East, you immediately think of Egypt and the Egyptian pyramids. Yeah, cool. Oh, and mummies. They got mummies in those pyramids. And I seen the movie The Mummy. And everyone there in the Middle East is riding camels around between oases with palm trees hanging out there. And there's belly dancing harems of beautiful women who are feeding fattened sultans figs or grapes or dates by hand, while those sultans are sitting around smoking hookah pipes, while flying on Persian magical flying carpets with Abu and Sinbad and Aladdin and all of the rest of the tales of the Arabian Nights, all there with you by their side. Wow, how awesomely delightful that is, but pretty simplistic. Now, if you're a adult or a reader of the news, or a political analyst, or maybe even a head of state, or just a citizen of the world, and you hear the term Middle East, it likely means chaos to you, and violence, and war. Everyone now thinks of the Middle East as this place that's laden and rife with conflicts all over the place, and conflicts and wars of all types and kinds. Civil wars in Syria and Iraq is disintegrating, and ethnic wars and religious wars maybe between Sunnis and Shias that we don't even understand, and territorial disputes between the Israelites and the Palestinians, and full-on wholesale political revolutions like the Arab Spring that are causing upheaval across the entire region, and terrorists. Holy crap, don't even get me started on terrorism, because the Middle East must be the place that's packed full of dozens or maybe hundreds of extremist terrorist organizations who want to destroy the region or their state or possibly the whole Western world along with them. Which is why the Western world has to send the CIA or the British MI6 secret agent operatives out there in the Middle East to sniff out all the action, which is then followed by sending in troops and jets and drones over this area to bomb people and kill all of the bad guys. And those religious extremist zealot bad guys may be completely fueled by hate, but the governments in the states they live in that they so hate are fueled by oil. That's right. That's another thing that adults think of when they think Middle East. They think oil. The Middle East has got all of the world's oil, most of it being controlled by politically repressive regimes and or dictators and or kings and or Islamic holy men that are somehow in power. Another thought about the Middle East from outsiders. But I encourage you, as always, let's think a little deeper. Let's think like a historian or even an archaeologist, because for most of human history, the Middle East would be described as the place that's the cradle of civilization itself. Certainly it is the core, the center of Western civilization. That's right. It's the whole idea of Team West and Western Civ, which is now all over the world. That started in the Middle East, my friends, not Europe. Think about the ancient Egyptians, the dudes with those cool pyramids and mummies. But even more than those folks, think about ancient Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where civilization may have been the first to crop up on planet Earth. And you got Sumeria and Babylonia and the Hittites and the Akkadians and the Assyrians and the Canaanites and the Phoenicians. All of these folks hanging out in this area called the Levant, a.k.a. the Fertile Crescent, many thousands of years ago. And those are the old names for those people that used to be there. That's not even to speak of the folks who are currently still there, like the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Persians, the Arabs. Those are folks that are still there and have been there for a long time. This whole dawn of civilization business was 10 to 12,000 years ago. And it occurred, again, in these places. It could very well be that Mesopotamia, this Fertile Crescent area, was the first scene where humans shifted from being hunter-gatherers in their lifestyle to more sedentary farmer types, which then evolved more complex societies. That started here in the Middle East. Again, it may have started there before it even started in Indus River Valley over in South Asia, or the Chinese civilization started over in East Asia. This could be the place where civilization itself started. It was here in the Middle East that people started to congregate into something like a village, which then grew into something like a town, and then maybe grew bigger into a city. In this arena of human evolution, we see perhaps some of the first cases of the division of society into a number of social classes, the development of large, densely populated urban centers, aka cities. The Middle East had some of the earliest and biggest cities on planet Earth. We also had the emergence of centralized political institutions, which lead to the formation of maybe an empire and then a state, like we have in today's world, and even specialization of occupations. So everybody started out maybe as hunter-gatherers, then they all moved to farming, but then very quickly people started to specialize and become blacksmiths or tinsmiths or artisans or merchants or priests or soldiers or kings in the Middle East. And increasingly, these folks, societies became more and more complex and entailed more long-distance trade and communication, networking. That's just globalization. It probably started here in the Middle East. The start of this globalization trend, my man, as these small towns and cities communicated with each other, traded goods and services and technologies and ideas. And those ancient dudes in the Middle East also came up with pretty cool things like, the wheel, the mill, irrigation systems. Cool. And even writing probably started in the Middle East. Think about those Phoenician guys, those seafaring trader type dudes who hung out in what's the modern state of Lebanon. They developed this thing called the phonetic alphabet. Ever heard of that? Because you use it still. And before them, the Egyptians came up with hieroglyphics. And before them, the Akkadians and Sumerians came up with cuneiform writing. All of these writing types came out of the Middle East, and they captured information that's then passed on to all generations, a critical component of civilization itself. And guess what? Have you ever heard of Arabic numerals? Arabic numerals, as in Arabian Peninsula. That's the numbering system the whole world uses right now. That started in the Middle East too. Actually, FYI. The Arabs stole it from the Indians, but it became part of the culture of the Middle East and then proliferated out to the Western civilization and became the world numbering system. But you know what? Those are tangibles. Let's think even deeper than that. Let's go deep about the Middle East. Think like a theologian or just a follower of any faith, a reveler in religion. The Middle East is awesomely important because it is the cradle/birthplace of the big three world monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Maybe you've heard of these things? All three started in not just the Middle East, the core of the Middle East. Maybe you've heard of some of the dudes like Noah, Abraham, Ishmael, Moses, Jesus? Ringing any bells? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? How about Muhammad? All of them did their work in what's now the Middle East. Every story is part of a single lineage, from Old Testament to New Testament to Quran, of this monotheistic Abrahamic religions. Every story you've ever heard and all of that stuff, everything, it all happened in the Middle East. All those peeps and their prophets, all their rules and all their rituals, from whence came the moral and ethical and legal codes and norms which are still used today by billions of people all over the world. So it's not simply a matter of these big three religions, which have billions of followers worldwide, but it's also all these other social constructs that evolved in the Middle East, like legal systems, the core of that is from these religions from the Middle East. So this region, the Middle East, has really always been kind of the center, in the middle of the story of civilization, and specifically Western civilization as a whole, from the start. And it continues to be a focus of global attention today, but for terribly different reasons. So, whose ideas about what the Middle East is are correct? Who's got it right? Well, everybody does, of course. All of the ideas are correct. And simultaneously, none of them are correct. What do I mean by that? Well, here in the early 21st century, this Middle East region is a hugely complex and perplexing part of the planet that's containing perhaps upwards of 500 million people, over 500 million folks in this region. It is a region that does have terrible political upheaval of all stripe. It is a region that has military intervention from outsiders, military extremists on the inside. It is a region that does have severe economic issues and economic stagnation and over-reliance on oil. It is a region that is lagging behind virtually all other regions in terms of levels of development and economic growth. And you put all these together, and it's a region that has untold suffering of tens, if not hundreds of millions of its citizens. It does have problems. But the Middle East has been the center of civilization since there was civilization. The Middle East has produced some of the biggies of human existence in terms of philosophies, religions, and technologies. The Middle East was home to some of the longest and strongest empires in history. This region was significantly ahead of its European neighbors for most of the last 2,000 years. Let me stress that again. For most of the last 2,000 years, the Middle Eastern region has been more developed than Europe. They had some of the best and oldest institutions of higher learning and universities and technological developments. That happened in the Middle East 1,000 years ago, not in Europe. And in today's world, the Middle East is no longer a huge center of world trade, which it mostly had been for the last couple thousand years, but it's still a center of the world energy market with all that oil. It's still quite important. It does have a rapidly growing population, one of the fastest growing on planet Earth, so it's of some consequence. And indeed, in a more maybe sugar-sweetened note, I kind of look at the Middle East as the center, truly the middle of the whole tapestry of the story of the existence of our species. So it's a whole lot of things rolled into one, and we want to kind of tease some of these things out and explore them in more detail, but also get you to understand what's happening in the modern Middle East. So let's get to it and do it and try to understand this complicated region called the Middle East. Now, I know, because of all the emails and questions I get nonstop. Everybody mostly wants to know, what's going on now? Why there's so much violence right now? Why is there terrorism over there right now? Why are these people killing each other right now? Hang on. We'll eventually get to all the bloody details about now, and hopefully along the way uncover some options for optimism. To do that, we will first explore the sameness factors which unite all of the states of this region and help identify it as a singular place, aka a singular region that we all know by name. We all know this place by name, but perhaps we really don't know that much about it or understand what the term means or why it's a singular homogeneous unit. I will highlight a handful of homogeneous factors that unite the Middle East, along with some major exceptions to those factors. Because while there are a whole bunch of things which are the same from Morocco all the way over to Iran, say like Islam, there are some exceptions, and in the Middle East's case, those exceptions are gigantically important. Like, almost everybody's Islamic. It's pretty same. It's pretty homogeneous across the region, except for Israel, and that's a huge exception. So we'll point out some major exceptions along the way on our story of the homogeneity of all these places put together into a single region. But to understand today's complexities, as is so often the case, we're going to have to backtrack a bit into history and identify the major teams that are competing for power and influence in the region, both historically and right now. So we, at some point, will take a homogeneous factors TV time out and focus on the individual players like the Arabs, the Persians, the Turks, the Jews, and possibly even the Kurds. We need to understand their background, their evolution, and their story as competing powers in this singular region. Once we do that, then the stage is set to finish off our huge lecture tour of the modern Middle East, its trials, its tribulations, its conflicts, its conundrums, its problems, and its promises. Sound like a potential plan? Alrighty then, buckle up. Let's do it. This may be the most complicated region we're going to talk about all semester. But before we get to it, where exactly is it? Who's in it? Who's not in it? We better go ahead and set the stage by putting all the players and states into what I'm going to call the Middle East. And let's do that now.